Hello, hope you're doing well, and happy Halloween! That's right, Halloween is finally here, and you know what that means. It's time to get spooky. So light a few jack-o'-lanterns and make sure you have some candy handy, because today we're going to be dipping into a few festive tales from Broadway and beyond, and bringing them from the stage to the page. Let's get started, shall we? Alright, well, I think I'm going to go ahead and get started by taking the mic back from our ghostly host there. Hopefully you won't miss him too terribly. I'm sure he'll pop up again sometime down the line. Anyway, welcome again to this year's Halloween special. It took me a while to decide exactly what I wanted to do for this year's Halloween video. I always try to make something fun for Halloween, but for whatever reason this year, for the longest time, I just couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. And then I remembered that I have been wanting to make a SPEEDPAINT series about musicals for absolutely ages, and macabre kind of horror musicals make up a very large chunk of my list of favourites, so I figured a big old Halloween triple feature like this was the perfect place to start. So yeah, as you just heard, today I am going to be taking a look at just a few of my favourite dark, Halloween-appropriate musicals, making some art about them, and maybe talking a little bit about why I enjoy them so much. In all of the pieces I'm going to be drawing today, I wanted to include some of my favourite songs or lyrics from each of the shows within the artworks themselves, either in a speech bubble in the background or actually physically interacting with the characters somehow, because I just think that's really fun. This first artwork that I'm drawing here is of Star Kid's most recent horror musical, Black Friday. And for this piece, I went with that last option and decided to have the characters sitting and leaning and generally physically interacting with all of the words around them. If you haven't seen Black Friday, it's a horror comedy musical that's actually a kind of sequel to another show called The Guy Who Didn't Like Musicals. Now obviously sequels aren't exactly something that you usually get in musical theatre, but because Star Kid release all of their shows online, they actually have the very unique ability to interconnect some of their shows like that, and I just think that the idea of an expanded horror musical cinematic universe is really clever and really cool. I know that their first horror production, The Guy Who Didn't Like Musicals, was inspired by this really old black and white horror movie called Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but if this particular show, Black Friday, had any such similar inspiration, I'm afraid I don't actually know what it was. Feel free to let me know in the comments if you do happen to know that particular piece of trivia though. Anyway, the basic plot of Black Friday is that there is a Cthulhu-esque monster called Wiggly trying to break out of his interdimensional prison by brainwashing Black Friday shoppers with a cuddly toy. Obviously, there are a bunch of other individual character arcs happening around that premise, and a bunch of throwbacks to the previous show, but that's the main kind of gist of it. As I say, there are plenty of characters in this show, and just as many fantastic songs to go with them, but the ones I ended up drawing here are Wiley on the left and Colonel McNamara on the right, and they're sitting on the title of one of my favourite songs from the show, called Monsters and Men. Technically, Monsters and Men and its reprise is just a Colonel McNamara song. It has nothing to do with Wiley, he doesn't feature in it, but I knew I wanted to draw Wiley for this piece because I just really enjoy Joey Richter as a villain. He's one of my favourite Star Kid performers, and I think he just does such a fantastic job at playing the bad guy. And I realised while listening to the soundtrack and trying to choose a song for this piece that, oh, of course, Monsters and Men works really well as a side-by-side description of these two characters. So let's work with that. I actually ended up listening to the soundtrack on a loop the whole time I was working on this, and I'd honestly forgotten just how much range it has. Like, it's partly a comedy show, sure, but they really do cover all of the bases from funny to emotional to genuinely really creepy. Some of my favourite tunes from this show have got to be Califor MIA, it's an absolute banger of a rock song, and a few of the more horror-fueled songs like Feast or Famine, which is a very funny descent into madness, and Do You Wanna Play, which genuinely creeps me out every time I hear it. It is so dang spooky. Oh, and don't even get me started on Take Me Back. I must have played that one at least 20 times on its own because it's just such a good romance duet and features another one of my favourite Star Kids on vocals, and the tune, it's got everything, it's real fun. And then this song, Monsters and Men, is, at least to me, a real favourite because it feels really inspirational and motivating. It's all about, you know, good versus evil and how there's bad in the world, but even so, you gotta step up and do the right thing in the face of it, fight the monsters and all of that. There's one lyric especially that comes up in both the normal version and the reprise later on, where McNamara says that you need to become your best self now. And it gives me chills every time. I really love it. One of Colonel McNamara's signature things as well is, like, authorizing people to use his firearm. If you've seen the shows, you'll know what I'm talking about, but because of that, I wanted to have him holding his gun out like he does in the show. Which, in hindsight, I really didn't think through because guns are hard to draw as it is, and it took me ages to figure out how to make his hand look normal with the gun in such a weird position. I also had Wiley holding the Wiggly doll that's at the center of this monster story, and an apple that he has at the start of this monologue that he has during the show, and then passes to an audience member, because that bit always just makes me laugh. A big part of this show is also this concept of a place called the Black and White, which is like this interdimensional purgatory. And initially I wanted to reference that in this artwork a little bit by either giving the text or the background a really defined black and white palette, but in the end the contrast just made everything look a bit too busy, so I scrapped that idea. Also, I only realized this literally right at the very end as I was finishing this artwork, but the combination of this particular song title and the characters' poses and expressions and just the overall layout kinda ended up making it look like the cover of some kind of paranormal gay romance comic, which, if you're familiar with the kind of work I usually do, is probably not entirely surprising, I will admit, but I promise that this time around any homoerotic undertones were a complete accident, I swear. Apparently everything I touch just turns to gay, and we're just gonna have to accept that. Anyway, the moral of this segment is that you should go and check out Star Kids horror musicals. They're really good, especially if you prefer your scares with a good dose of comedy on the side. And this was really fun to draw. I enjoyed these characters a lot. Next up is probably the most well-known show out of this trio, Heathers. If you want to be technical about it, it's probably more of a thriller than a horror, but it is dark. And it is also a long-time personal favourite of mine, so it gets to be included in this video due to my own personal biases, if nothing else. If you're somehow not already familiar with Heathers, it's a musical based on a movie about an 80s high school full of mean teens, a girl called Veronica who gets caught up with a bunch of popular kids, and her new boyfriend JD who wants to murder all of the popular kids and make them look like suicides. Like I said, it gets really dark, but it's also just a really punchy and fun show about terrible people doing terrible things, and all of the feelings that come up along the way in the face of that. Now, if I'm being honest, every single song on the Heathers soundtrack is absolutely iconic in one way or another, and take an immense amount of talent and skill to even be able to sing in the first place, so it's just such a treat to listen to. There are a whole bunch of really emotive songs like 17 and I Am Damaged, and then funnier tracks like Big Fun and My Dead Gay Son, but beyond that it's just absolutely loaded with funky, high-energy villain songs. Which you know I love. If a show has a good villain song, then it automatically owns my heart. That's just how it works. One that you probably will have heard somewhere on the internet, even if you've never heard of Heathers before, is Candy Store, which is so catchy that even just listening to it once will leave it stuck in your head for about a week. And then JD's villain songs are on a whole nother level. Freeze Your Brain and Meant to Be Yours in particular are two songs that are just very spicy and intense and scary in places, and just everything you kind of want from a villain song. They're very enjoyable. But as much as I enjoy the villain songs, the songs I enjoy the most have got to be Veronica's. Partly because Carrie Hope Fletcher, who plays her, is just an absolutely phenomenal singer, but also because a lot of Veronica's songs are really energizing and empowering and just really, really cool. Dead Girl Walking was my favourite for a long time because it just absolutely slaps, but back when Heathers was doing a tour here in the UK, they actually added a new song to the soundtrack called I Say No, and as soon as I heard that one, it instantly became my favourite musical number, not just from Heathers, but from any show. It's really good. I don't know how much of this is a spoiler, but I Say No is basically the song where Veronica puts her foot down and says that she's done with being manipulated and being part of a toxic relationship. A lot like Dead Girl Walking, it's an absolute banger, but it also just carries a lot of weight because of everything that's happened in the story up until that point, but also because it's incredibly relatable and motivating if you've ever been caught in an unhealthy dynamic yourself. Needless to say, I had a ton of fun with the artwork for this one. I've actually drawn Heather's fan art on this channel once already, ages and ages ago, but that was a good while before this song was actually added to the soundtrack. So back then, I drew Veronica more so how she is in, kinda like the first half of the show when she's still all caught up in JD's nastiness. This time around though, it was all about this I Say No energy. Women being powerful and taking a stand is one of the best things both to see and to draw, so I wanted to make sure that she looked appropriately powerful here, both in her pose and in her expression. Low angles, however, are really hard to get right, so I ended up looking up a photo reference from Senshi Stock, which is one of the best pages out there for pose references. They have so much stuff, I would always recommend them, and I had that in front of me on my phone while I was drawing to make sure that I got the proportions correct. I also had a bunch of tabs open to check the hair and the costume and the color palette, all of that stuff. I know I say it all the time, but it's always worth repeating, you can never have too much reference. Please use a reference. It's not cheating, it's just good use of tools. Please use a reference. I also pulled up a tab to check what a 7-Eleven slushy cup looked like, because we don't have that brand here in the UK, and I wanted to make sure that the spilled cup full of symbolism on the ground was accurately packaged. Once I was done colouring this piece normally, I also used a layer blend mode that Paint Tool Sai has that's just called Colour to give the whole picture a blue tone, because obviously, as you can see, blue is Veronica's signature colour. Overall, I'm really happy with how this one turned out. I honestly didn't expect it to go quite as well as it did. I don't draw women as often as I draw guys, so I had a lot of fun putting in all of the details on the skirt and figuring out the anatomy from that low angle. And much like with the last one, I also really enjoyed getting to listen to this song about 50 times on repeat while I was working. If you haven't seen or listened to Heather's before anyway, hopefully this serves as a heartfelt recommendation for you to go and check it out, especially as a bit of a Halloween treat. And with that, let's move on to the final fantastic creature feature in this trio of shows. Last, but certainly not least, it's time for Dracula. But not just one incarnation of Dracula. This one's kind of a combination of inspirations. You see, this final artwork and this final show is probably the one that I've been the most excited to talk about in this video, purely because of the very roundabout way that I ended up discovering it. So, I'm a big fan of a few other classic literature-inspired horror musicals like Jekyll and Hyde and Frankenstein, which are both brilliant by the way, and you should definitely check those out as well. And some way or other, through them, I ended up stumbling upon a recording of a performance of Dracula the musical. Specifically, it was a recording of this one song called It's Over, which is the one I'm drawing reference from for this piece. It's this big showdown duet between Van Helsing and Dracula. It's got big rock opera vibes, there's loads of electric guitars and big belting notes and people flinging themselves across the stage. It's so much fun. The thing is, this video that I'd stumbled upon was actually a recording of a production of Dracula done in German. Now, I've said as much in videos before, but I do actually really enjoy languages, and in particular, I really love German. I learned it in secondary school, and although my teacher was a horror story for another day, I always thought that the language itself is really beautiful. So technically the title of this song that I'd found was actually Zu Ende, and somehow the fact that it was in German kind of made it even more interesting. I remember I pretty much played it non-stop for a good while after I first heard it. I just couldn't get it out of my head. But because I couldn't fully understand the lyrics, I thought I'd look into the English version and see how it sounded in my own language. But the thing is, while there is an English language cast recording of Dracula that is really good and has all of the other fabulous songs from the soundtrack on it, for some reason, Zu Ende isn't there. To this day, I cannot find a clean English version of Van Helsing and Dracula's epic duet anywhere. I did manage to find one very grainy stage recording video of a very small-scale English production of Dracula, but, well, they tried their best, but, it just did not go anywhere near as hard as the German version, to put it kindly. But again, they were trying. They were trying. While I was searching through anyway, I did end up coming across another version of It's Over, not in English, but this time from a Korean production. And let me tell you, it was a good discovery. Because while I still prefer the German vocals, the staging, the costuming, and the choreography of the Korean version are all amazing. And the visuals of the Korean show are actually what inspired the designs for this artwork. As you can see, they really went all in on the costumes. Dracula had this super striking red hair, ruffled shirt, and leather pants combo, which honestly just combined all of my favourite design elements into one look. And Van Helsing had this really cool coat that he kept swishing dramatically throughout the whole number, so I knew I had to draw a dramatic coat sweep into this picture too. Also, I think Dracula in the Korean production might have been played by a K-pop star. I'm not entirely sure though, so if any of you are into K-pop, actually if any of you are into K-pop, you probably know that already, if indeed they are a K-pop star, and if indeed they are your fave K-pop star. I hear that K-pop fans know a lot of things. Regardless of who they were though, the actors in both the German and the Korean productions of Dracula committed so hard to their performances during this number. Like I said earlier, the song involves a lot of moments where people are like fighting and throwing themselves across the stage, and it's so engaging to see just how much energy was going into all of that during both performances of this song. There's one moment in particular where Van Helsing falls to his knees before a big chorus kicks in, and I remember in the German version, one visual just like stays with me from it, where the guy playing Van Helsing goes so all in on the drop that the cross he was holding in his hand just goes flying off in another direction and you don't see it again. I just love that energy, there's so much passion in it. And I really wanted to try and get some of that energy across in this drawing as well. There's actually one split-second moment before the lights go out at the end of the Korean version where the actors end up in a similar position to this, which I used as the inspiration for these poses. Lately, I've been trying to get better at following through with lines of action in my pose drawings, and both this and the Heather's piece from before were such good practice for that. I'm super happy with the flow of these poses in particular though, with Dracula's arms leading from the top left corner and down into the sweep of Van Helsing's coat. I also used a slightly different pen pressure than I normally would while working on this piece, and it made the inking process feel so much more organic and inky. Especially while working on Dracula's big puffy shirt, that was so satisfying to ink. All in all, compared to the other two shows I've drawn today, Dracula is a much more mixed bag in terms of what I would recommend to you guys musically. If you want to check out the song that inspired this artwork, then definitely look up the German version of Zu Ende for the vocals, and the Korean version It's Over for the staging. But if you do want to check out the English soundtrack, you should do that as well. There are a bunch of really great songs on there too. Fresh Blood and Life After Life have massive edgy vampire energy in the best way, and this is going to be really, really specific, but the song Deep in the Darkest Night sounds like something you would hear in a 90s animated movie that was released direct to VHS. I cannot explain why, but it has that exact vibe, and I really like it. Maybe if you go listen to it, you'll understand what I mean, or maybe that's just a weird me thing. I have no idea. Anyway, that is just about it for this drawing, which means that the whole set is complete. So let's go ahead and take a look at all of the finished artworks. And back to me. That's it for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed seeing these shows brought to life, and hopefully you got some good recommendations out of it too. Did you see one of your favourites get drawn today, or do you perhaps have a few recommendations of your own for more monstrous musicals that are worth checking out this Halloween? Feel free to share your thoughts with the other wandering souls down in the comments, but for now, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Happy Halloween!